Hey everyone, it's Bazza here from Living in Beta, and today we're going to be breaking down one of the bosses of Elden Ring, the Tibia Mariner. We'll be going over spawn locations, moveset, as well as some potential strategies to give you a better chance of grabbing victory. Let's get into the video. The Tibia Mariner is a skeletal figure aboard a spectral boat. Players will find this boss in several locations. They can be found in the flooded areas of Summonwater Village in Limgrave, a small pool within Liana of the Lakes, south of the Artist's Shack, as well as the waterlogged southwest section of Windham Ruins. Within this video, we'll be focusing on the Liana of the Lakes location, although attacks and general strategy apply to the other areas also. For this boss, I was likely slightly underleveled and ill-equipped, as you'll see from the damage I was inflicting. However, the Mariner isn't overly dangerous and only has a few high damage attacks that could catch you off guard if you're unfamiliar with them. For my stats, I was at an overall level of 21, with my highest attributes being Intelligence at 22, as well as Dexterity and Mind both at level 15. My total hit points was 432, FP was 84, and Stamina was 95, although this only affected my attack speed as I rode Torrent for the duration of the fight. For my left and right hand equipment, I used the Astrologer's Staff, leveled up to +2, as well as the large leather shield. My outfit consisted of the Astrologer's Hood and robe, mixed with Godric's Soldier Gauntlets and Greaves. The talisman I had equipped was the Hammer Talisman, enhancing stamina reducing attacks against blockers, which isn't entirely relevant here. Now we've gone over the setup, let's get into the boss fight itself. I relied solely on magic for this fight, using glintstone spells, specifically glintstone pebble, due to the homing effect, useful for when charging about the area on Torrent. However, I also did get in close to understand how the Mariner's attacks and behaviours change. With a higher damage spell or melee weapon, you'll likely burn through this boss fairly quickly. To start with, it's worth noting that this boss summons a skeletal mob to assist them in the fight. If you're on Torrent, you can fairly easily avoid these due to your speed. On the other hand, if you're on foot, it's worth clearing out some of these enemies to ensure you don't become overwhelmed. There are ranged magic users and melee users in the mob. The magic users will summon a homing skull by hitting their scythe into the ground. Keep an eye on these as you may need to change direction to avoid impact. If you weren't in range when the skull was summoned, it will remain in place. Take care not to run into it. There's a neat trick where you can interrupt one of the Mariner's attacks which will damage and sometimes kill this skeletal mob. We'll cover this momentarily as we go through the moveset. The boss is fairly slow and can be avoided easily when using Torrent, which is what I would recommend. If using melee though, it can be hard to connect attacks whilst riding Torrent, depending on the weapon you use. First up, we have the Mariner's call for aid via his horn. They will likely use this early on. You'll see the horn glow red whilst the Mariner is using it, with skeletal soldiers rising from the ground around him. This is a good opportunity to get some free hits in. Just be sure to keep your greed in check as you could be swamped by the risen mob. Next, we have teleportation. The Mariner will move around the field becoming invisible and untargetable for a short period of time. If you're a melee user, it's worth clearing out some of the skeletal mob at this point. However, if you're riding Torrent, feel free to reposition whilst relocating the boss. On Torrent, you're much quicker than the mob, so you shouldn't have any trouble avoiding them. It's worth noting that just before the Mariner teleports, you can get a couple of hits in, so it's worth doing to get that extra bit of damage. An attack that can do significant damage if you're caught is the Wave Crash. The Mariner will hold his glowing red fist up to the sky whilst rising up in his boat on a wave. After a short time, the boat will come crashing down, damaging any within range. Luckily for us, this also includes the mob, so it helps with clearing some of the enemies out. Just be sure to give the attack a wide berth. When in melee range, the Mariner will switch up their attacks and behaviour, becoming slightly more aggressive. One of their attacks is lifting up the bow of the boat and crashing back down. This is clearly telegraphed, and you can simply run back or roll out of the way. Another attack that this boss relies on when in melee range is a water fling. The Mariner will ready his horn whilst hunching to one side, swiping water in your direction. Again, this is clearly telegraphed and avoidable. You can either run to the side he is hunched over to, or roll out of the way of the water. Another one of the Mariner's attacks sees them raise their horn in the air, with a bright glowing orb at the top. This is another AoE attack that can be avoided or interrupted. If you attack the Mariner and inflict sufficient damage, the spell is interrupted, causing it to damage anything in the vicinity, including the mob. It's best to try and interrupt this with range and avoid using melee. As mentioned, I recommend using Torrent for this fight. The speed at which you can maneuver makes avoiding the mob easy, whilst you can also get in and out of range of the Mariner swiftly. Magic or range combat seems to be the safest option. You can freely damage the boss with little repercussions. If you choose this route, specifically magic, it's worth considering your flask allocation beforehand. I allocated most of my flasks to FP, or Cerulean Tears, with a 5:1 ratio against healing flasks. This was to ensure I had enough FP to sustain my damage. The 1 health flask helped in case I was hit with any homing skulls. Line up your attacks with the Mariner, firing up to 3 or 4 at a time. Take note of the positioning of the skeletal mob and ensure you avoid the summoned homing skulls. You can rinse and repeat this tactic until the boss falls. If you're a melee user, it's worth clearing out at least some of the mob if you want staying close to the Mariner, else you could end up skewered pretty quickly. If you're going to duck in and out, you can risk ignoring the mob and focusing on DPS. However, this can be fairly risky, as the mob can quickly overwhelm you, leaving you open to the Mariner's attacks. I'd recommend clearing out the skeletal soldiers closest to the Mariner and barraging with 2 to 3 attacks at a time, repositioning as necessary to avoid the previously mentioned melee ranged attacks, whilst also keeping note of the skeletal mob. When the mob grows in size, back up and refocus on clearing out some of the soldiers. Just remember with this fight, there's no rush, as the Mariner's attacks stay pretty much the same throughout. If you're taking some heat, back up, reset, and ensure you use that health flask. If you're having a particularly hard time, remember you're able to use summons or bring the friendly NPC or co-op partner. Eventually your patience will pay dividends and you'll see the Mariner fall. Depending on where you fought the Mariner, you will obtain different rewards. For Liana of the Lakes, where I fought the boss, you'll receive a Death Root, Skeletal Bandit Ashes, as well as 4,700 runes. If fought in Summonwater Village, you'll receive a Death Root, Skeletal Militia Ashes, and 2,400 runes. And then finally, if fought in Windham Ruins, you'll receive a Death Root and Tibia Summons. Well guys, that's been our boss breakdown of the Tibia Mariner. Hopefully it gave you some helpful insight that will lead you to victory in the fight. Let us know in the comments if you fought the Mariner yet and how it went. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this content, drop us a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. As always, we'll catch you in the next one.